Thank you very much. And it's almost as though we had a plan, because Lynn ended talking about costs. So you're either prescient or a genius or both, because that's what I'm going to obsess about today, talking about cost. So we've heard many, many talks about how information, knowledge, gathering information, doing experiments, monitoring, all those things are useful. Well, we wouldn't be sitting in this room if we hadn't gathered some knowledge sometime in the last 20,000 years, I suppose. But the question is, how useful? So, you know, the talk title is, when should we gather data and when should we just do stuff? Well, it seems to me that 99% of the time, when you're in a scientific or an academic circumstance, or in a place where people have been trained in universities, if somebody says to them, should we get some more data, they'll say yes. Should we do some more science? Yeah, that's what I do. We'll do some of that. And I question that, because you have a choice, and society has a choice what to do with information. One could say that the modern advanced societies in the world have advanced because of knowledge and science, so it would be stupid to stop it. Of course, we're not going to stop it, but the question is how much. And I loved Malcolm's talk this morning, because he actually gave me a data point, wherever Malcolm is, for RSPB. 11% of their budget, broadly speaking, is spent on science and monitoring. 11%. Should it be 20%? Should it be 5%? Should they just accept they know everything about blue tits? So now they'll just go and save them. Well, they're saving themselves. So, okay. So why do I ask these questions, other than to be just annoying? I ask them because I've spent most of my life. I don't love science for science sake, unfortunately. Sorry. I want to save the world. And as part of my process of saving the world, I have long-standing relationships with many people, ministers, senior public servants, NGO sector. And this is a telling statement, I think, from Robert Hill. Robert Hill became the Defence Minister, one of our most senior politicians for a long period of time, still alive and well. And he, actually, in contrast to what John Bennington said last night, he said that when he asked scientists what the answer to a question is, John said that he's unusual because he says he doesn't know. Well, in fact, apparently, according to John, they tell people what they do know. I actually think this is their normal answer. Give me some money and give me a lot of time, and then I'll tell you how it works. And then after a couple of years working with me, he said it was unusual because I either told him the best I knew, then told him I didn't know much, and I told him who to go and talk to, but I never asked for money. I never asked for more time. And it's a valid question, you know, why have we been funding CSIRO, universities, a whole heap of organisations for years and years to solve conservation problems, when every single time, literally every single time he asked them a question, they asked for more time and more money. So that's disappointing and makes people very cynical in the general public. So let's go back to the top, and it's nicely introduced by Lynn, is obviously we're gathering all this to eventually go to that pinnacle point, which is some sort of decision support tool, and I have a very, very pluralistic view of a decision support tool. A decision support tool could be a map. It could be a document, could be anything. It doesn't have to be some computational, messy, horrible thing. But the ultimate objective, of course, if this is genuinely applied research that we're doing, is that we don't evaluate it in terms of papers, in terms of knowledge, in terms of reducing uncertainty. They're all the things we're taught to do. When we do science, we're reducing uncertainty, we're understanding how a system works. There are objectives. If it's 100% applied research, I'm not saying everything should be, nor would I say that anything is, but the only evaluation of something that's 100% applied research is delivery of an outcome. Delivery of an outcome. Yet virtually never does anybody evaluate science and monitoring in terms of the delivery of an outcome relative to what else they could have done with those resources, that time and money. And that is value of information analysis. And I know hardly anybody does it, because other than us and USGS and a few other people, virtually nobody publishes on it and nobody uses it in practical circumstances. So that's what I want to roughly go through today. The trouble is, the value of information analysis may not be high either. if that makes sense. So it's a bit like the question to Andrew, what's the value of systematic reviews, and have you done a systematic review of systematic reviews? Value of information analysis, which is how much is the science worth and the monitoring worth relative to what else I could do, may itself not be worthwhile doing because it's too expensive and time-consuming to do. Let me explain that later. Okay, so tricky problems. This, I suppose, if there's one diagram I want you to remember, this is the diagram I want you to remember. I'm going to step through it relatively slowly. And I like Malcolm's talk because it gives me a really good excuse to look at this situation. Now, where's my little pin? Okay, so let's just start from the beginning. Firstly, you have a budget, you have a pile of money. RSPB has a pile of money, and they can spend a certain amount of their budget on monitoring and research. And they could spend all of their money on monitoring and research, and they would never take a single management action. So there's the amount of money spent on management, and they could spend none of their money on monitoring and research, and Malcolm would be out of a job, but they spend all their money doing stuff. Great. But if that seems like a bad end, I think not doing any management at all would be somewhat criticised. Is this a good end? Maybe we should get rid of all those scientists and those monitoring people. So how can we justify this? This is the stuff that delivers the skylarks and the lapwings and the hen harriers. This is the stuff we want to do. So therefore, if this is taking away from that, there must be some benefit to that. So one would have to assume that the more we do, there's this line is a fact, right? There's no avoiding that line. Money is money. This line is the line we don't really know, the purple line. What is the efficiency of management if we do more research and monitoring? So how much better do we spend the money we've got to spend if we think a bit, if we synthesise information over a period of time? What does that look like? Well, if it doesn't go up faster than a slope of 1 at the beginning, if the efficiencies you're gaining from new knowledge and monitoring don't deliver you more than $1 of outcome per dollar spent, you shouldn't do any of it. One would hope it does go up faster than that, and the fact that almost all management agencies involved in some form of evaluation and monitoring and thinking, one would say it must go up. But what is the slope and when does it bend over? When these two slopes are the same, that is, this is the net outcome. It's the multiplication of the red line and the purple line, and that is the net benefit from the combination, your allocation to these two activities, research monitoring versus doing stuff. Of course, I haven't put communication and other things in here. So what's the answer? Well, it's 11% because we found out this morning. Who knows? I mean, it could be 11%, could be a lot of, and one could argue, let's look at some of the big companies, Dow Chemical, a whole heap of industries, and say how much of their money do they spend on research and evaluation, and that actually surprisingly is often around 5 to 20%. Some spend virtually nothing on it, some spend an enormous amount on it. So this is the question I'm really interested in. We have answered that question now for a reasonable number of particular problems. We don't have a general answer. We don't have a general theory, and maybe sort of it's an evolutionary process. If NGOs don't do enough of this, they do badly. If they do more of it, if particular actors do more or not. This is the question that fascinates me, and we still haven't worked it out. It's a massive allocation question. It's a massive allocation question. So that's a very general statement about, well, what is the benefit? What I want to get you to think a little bit more about and maybe broaden out, okay, we're talking here about management, doing experiments where we put up fences. I saw a talk here about put up fences to restrict the movement of lizards so they don't get squashed on roads. So they're very things that we can do. That's all in the sort of this very sciencey end of the value of monitoring research. There's some actually other much more nebulous purposes to monitoring research, although ultimately, as I say, they should always be valued in the things you care about. I'm trying to save this bird, I'm trying to save this lizard, I'm trying to save this ecosystem. That's the ultimate point of evaluation. But it isn't just about how high should the fence be, what kind of diameter hole should the nest box have. It's also about a whole heap of other things. For example, sometimes we just evaluate and monitor things because we want to check somebody did them. We gave them a whole heap of money to plant trees. Did they really plant the trees? Did they grow? A whole heap of this stuff is not doubted at all. We need to monitor what's going on in fisheries because we have to set a quota next year. So no one would doubt that element of monitoring. That's very clear. We need to, and EJ talked a lot about it, develop better system models. EJ said she likes models and not everybody uses models. Well, actually, I think everybody is a modeler. A modeler is a person who predicts the consequences of an action And if you put one foot in front of the other and you think, I might go forward, then you're modelling. So I'm pretty sure everybody does that. Every sentient being, a rat can do that. So every sentient being models because they're taking actions, and 99.9% of your day you take an action and you get a pretty predictable outcome. You put food in your stomach and you don't feel it. It's just, you're modelling. You're modelling all the time. There's verbal models and there's nasty mathematical models and there's statistical models and every other kind of model. Let's get over the modelling thing. Everybody's a modeller, but some models are good and some models are better, some models are too complicated, some models are too simple. This is the thing I'll talk briefly about adaptive management, where we're trying to actually manage. So I presented that diagram as so gathering information and taking action was two separate tasks, but we know that this wonderful thing, adaptive management, which we rarely do, means we can do both simultaneously. So that's great. There's learning for learning's sake, which I won't talk about. But then there's all these other things. You know, if we weren't generally looking at the state of birds in the US from the Breeding Birds Survey, would we have picked up the impact of DDT and a whole heap of other things and songbird crises, and where are those songbirds going? Is it a problem in the US? Is it a problem in Central America? So there's a whole heap of serendipitous outcomes for monitoring and research that are very hard to predict. And I would say the value of information analysis that I'm going to talk about in a second cannot be applied to many of those situations. And of course, also, the importance of engaging people, even if you do nothing, and citizen science is an example, that even if you do nothing with the data, then just engaging people in the decision-making, monitoring science process is enormously beneficial and will deliver outcomes for the things you care about. We struggle to actually quantify these, and so therefore my obsession about optimising everything is a bit of a problem. That purple line, the benefit of more research to delivering outcomes, is going to always be a struggle in those situations. So just a couple of comments, and I'll talk briefly to try and explain the value of information analysis in the simplest possible way, because it's becoming more and more popular. What I want to briefly do is just clarify something about adaptive management. So in adaptive management, you're doing a lot about what the RSPB would do. They would be both doing interventions and getting outcomes and trying different things. Passive adaptive management, there's confusion. Passive adaptive management just means that if you're doing stuff and you're not doing anything new, but if you find out what you're doing isn't any good, you'll change it. Well, that's sort of like anybody that doesn't do that is an idiot. Not changing actions, that would mean they're a government, I think, when there's demonstrable evidence that the action is failing. Experimental management is on the other end, which is actually saying, I'm going to do all my management as a massive big experiment. That's what people in a university would like to do, perfectly designed to maximise the gain in information, not maximise the gain in outcomes. And you wouldn't want to do that on a highly threatened species. You just can't afford the wastage of trying a whole heap of wacky ideas, because a few pandas are going to die feeding them strange diets. So you just don't do that, do you? In the middle is this interesting thing, is how do you optimally trade off the relationship between the desire to gain knowledge and the desire to get outcomes. And if you just keep doing the best thing, passive adaptive management is suboptimal. You do have to do some experimentation, but experimentation costs in terms of outcomes. You will kill an animal here or there, but how much is it worth? And there's now a series of papers that can tell you how to do all those things. One of the things that really annoys me is climate change research, but there's so many people, we all done it. Half my grants say the word climate change in the last 10 years, and I'm not interested in it at all. So many people have come to me and said, we need a monitoring. This was a case at Nature Conservancy Reserve in Mexico. We're worried about climate change as medium-sized marine reserve, Baja California. We need to know the impact of climate change on our marine reserve. And what should we monitor? Should we monitor the dolphins? Should we monitor the seals? Should we monitor the fish? Should we monitor the birds? Should we monitor the algae? I said, why do you want to know that? What are you going to do? 10 years later, you say, climate change is impacting my marine reserve. The species are moving north. Are you going to move the reserve north? Are you going to write to China, dear China, stop burning coal because you're messing up our marine reserve? Or Australia, stop selling them coal because you're messing up marine reserve. I'll take some blame. Bottom line is, there's not a lot of point doing a whole heap of research and monitoring about a topic that you can do nothing about. Obviously, you might say, well, I can ameliorate runoff and that will help the resilience of my system to climate change. But I would say their biggest problems are going to be sediments and nutrients in runoff. And that's where they should be monitoring and doing research. Their biggest problems are going to be poaching. That's because they can do something about that. They can do something then and now in a 5-year time frame. They cannot stop the world burning fossil fuel. But so many groups of people make these questions, and there's a whole heap of other. Australia likes counting whales, and they spend a lot of money counting whales, and I always ask them, when am I going to get to eat one? Because you must be trying to find the carrying capacity so we can set up an optimal harvesting regime. I mean, we're just counting whales and they're going up, and I have no idea what's going on. Okay, so I think I've sort of covered all those things. There's some interesting papers there by Eve McDonald-Madden, Ian Dunn-Charles. There's a series of papers where we really try and get down to the nitty-gritty and ask that question. In this paper, you know, there's a whole heap of circumstances when monitoring really and research really may not be a good thing to be spending any of your resources on. And let's face it, this is a crisis discipline. We've already heard many people say the time between research and monitoring and impact in policy and management can be very, very slow. Well, maybe we haven't got that much time. So, if you really want to do a proper evaluation, this is the stuff, value of information analysis. I think this is the loveliest and most recent paper, and I'm not a co-author on it, Stefano, and that gives you a really good idea of how value of information works. And I'll just quickly run through a simple example. We have system models. We have system models, and in all those system models, even if they're verbal system models, there's uncertain parameters. This might be the mortality rate of seabirds. Okay, and then somebody says, well, we're going to try a strategy, and we evaluate that strategy in terms of, say, the persistence of this seabird. So more persistent if the parameter is up here, less persistent if the parameter is there. This is a strategy. This might be bycatch mitigation strategy type A. And it would work better if the parameter was here and worse if the parameter was there. Now, that's easy. Well, if there's only one action, just do it. So, end of that story. No, the value of information, studying and reducing, this is what scientists do. They see uncertainty about a parameter, like the mortality rate of seabirds, and they want to reduce it because they want to reduce uncertainty. Why? There's only one thing you can do. But then there might be two things we can do. And if the two things we can do actually, B is better regardless of A, regardless of the parameter, then you do nothing as well. Why would you do anything? You're always going to do B. And so you have to know your actions. There's no point in working out how to do take actions. You've got to know the benefits of your actions under all levels of uncertainty. If one's always better, so that's boring. Well, this is a bit more interesting. Strategy B could be better than strategy A depending on the parameter. If the parameter's up here, then I should be doing A. If the parameter's down there, I should be doing B. But the benefit is so small, the value of information is tiny, surely I'd probably just not bother. And then only when we have a situation like this would we do the value of information analysis. And the value of information analysis is really saying, if you're now doing A, what's the chance of that really you're over here, and how much more would you get if you did B? So it's integration of the left-hand side of the curve if you're currently doing A with the gap. And that's it. That's the value. That tells you the value of information if you can do that integration. A few other random comments. I think all of these things are very important when we're thinking about research and monitoring. How much does it really cost? How long is it going to take to do? If we find this new action, Australia will spend a lot of time trying to invent a virus to kill foxes in Australia, a novel genetically engineered virus. What would you guys think if we released a genetically engineered virus to kill foxes in Australia? It was never going to happen. We spent millions and millions of dollars on something that was never, ever going to happen. Strange. This is one that I get obsessed about. This is the thing to be all wary of. One thing, if you ask for more money and they give it to you, they're probably just trying to get rid of you. Sorry, is that the one? Sorry, not that one. Oh, this is the one. Is monitoring a political displacement activity to keep scientists busy. That's the one I worry about a lot. I know I'm running out of time. Let me point out that I do as little as possible, and these are the wonderful people who do all the work. I do talk too fast in an Australian accent. And we do we try to communicate. I think we do a very bad job at it, but our iconic publication is called Decision Point, and we take all those inscrutable articles with equations, and this incredible person called David Salt writes something that somebody normal would quite like to read while waiting to have their teeth done. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Hugh. I think we'll take one question because we have 2 speakers to get in before lunchtime. The one at the back, Camilla, run up the stairs.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. My name's Rosie Woodrow from the Ecological Society of London. I was interested in how you cope with uncertainty, not just about perhaps the value of a parameter, but actually how the system works. And I asked because I was involved in a very large experiment looking at the effect of badger culling on TB in cattle, which showed, to the surprise of pretty much everybody, that something which had been in policy for 20 years was actually making the problem worse rather than better. And yet it's very hard to predict when you're going to have those counterintuitive findings. So how do you deal with that sort of uncertainty, not just about what the value of a parameter is, but what direction?
Exactly. If the parameter is not even in your system model and you don't even know the equations. And so it's more the unknown unknowns. And I think the horizon scanning thing is what we had on the first day, is partly the answer to that. The horizon scanning, but also having a very fulsome system model, and we've been in an interesting workshop in Leipzig recently where you're not just looking at the network of interactions between species and viruses and diseases, but you start looking at the network of interaction between human values, if an action occurs, is that unacceptable, socio-political issues. So I think that means almost like a mind mapping exercise, and we try and puzzle through all the possible perverse outcomes that could occur to try and deal with it. Of course, you'll miss some, but horizon scanning and scanning for perverse outcomes, I think, is a partial solution to that question. And it's hard to evaluate in the framework that I've talked about.
As there was such a rash of hands, maybe one more question. Can you go behind you, Karen? Lady at the back.
Hello, Natalie Seddon, University of Oxford. I assume your comments were made slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I wonder whether you might think it would dangerous for politicians to hear senior scientists stridently undermining the importance of climate change research. And do you seriously think we can't do anything? Much conservation management can be designed so as to minimise the known impacts of climate change on biodiversity.
Is that the only stupid thing I said? I saw a few. No, I agree. I just feel as though we've spent a massive effort on it. So I've spent my life fighting land clearing. If you destroy thousands of hectares of vegetation, you destroy and remove the viability of hundreds of species. It's here, it's now, invasive species. In Australia, these 2 things are wiping out species so much faster than climate change. Maybe climate change will catch up. I reckon it'll take 50 years. But I have seen the entire research community lurch into that space. And so sometimes what's interesting is not important, what's important is not interesting. So I fear, yes, like most people who are trying to bend the Titanic, which is the juggernaut that says let's do more climate change and climate adaptation research, I sometimes bend it in a slightly aggressive way. But of course it's important, it's just that I think we've overemphasised it.
Thank you, Hugh. All those other hands, please, can you come immediately and nobble Hugh when we break for lunch? Thank you very much.